Okay, well, thanks for spending your Saturday morning with us. I really appreciate you coming to learn more about this really important issue on National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So it makes it, and actually today is the day, National Human Trafficking Awareness Day, that got written in by President Obama in 2000. So prior to that, there was no law against it. So really, it's a big celebration to have for us all. What is that, 25 years now? So a lot of hard work it took to get that. So as you're coming on, please feel free to write your name and where you're from, maybe your profession, in the chat button. We have several amazing survivor leaders here with us. And this is the Preventing Human Trafficking at the 2026 World Cup in a survivor inclusive way. And I'll explain more about that later. I'm Theresa Flores. I am a survivor of human trafficking as well, a best-selling author. I'm located in Columbus, Ohio, and I partner with the coalition, the New Jersey Coalition, with our SOAP project and many, many other ways as well. And it's just been such an honor to collaborate them since the first Super Bowl in New Jersey. I think it's been like about 14 years ago. So we've been working together. So we have some amazing survivor leaders here. And when I said that this was a survivor inclusive conversation, I mean that. Like, this is, all of us on this are just not just survivor. We're survivors. And we have a different perspective than maybe somebody else. And so, as Gina loves to say, this can't be done without us because it's about us, right? So I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves, tell them where you're from, kind of what you're working on. And so we're going to start with Ms. Katrina.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Katrina Massey. I am based out of New York City and Atlanta as well. And I have been in this movement for almost 20 years now. I've been able to use my experience to provide direct services for victims of sex trafficking. I've had an opportunity to lobby for specific bills and laws to be enacted so that victims are protected. And throughout this time, what's been the most, I guess, pleasurable for me is moments like this when we get to share the information with people and talk to people about how this experience impacts this movement, how this experience impacts the anti-trafficking space and how victims are treated. What do you say when you see a victim? How do you respond in those types of spaces? So I'm very happy to be here. I'm currently one of the board of directors of PACT. I sit on a few advisory boards across the country, and I will pass it on to John Michael, sorry.
Oh, you're muted, John Michael.
There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you. I'm honored to be here and to be asked by the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking to speak to you all today, and for all of you to be here to hear us and listen to us and to believe us. Those are the big things I like to get across. The thing I want to share is that knowledge is power, and knowledge is understanding and comprehending. As a 14-year-old Olympic-bound athlete, the adults entrusted with my training and sponsorship sex trafficked me for all 4 years of my high school career under the pretense that it was an opportunity to represent my country, to go to the Olympics, and to earn a college scholarship. During my trafficking experiences, I traveled all over the world and I won gold medals at Norway and the Danish Cups. And since then, I broke my silence about 5 years ago with a TED Talk. And then I found the athlete silence. And I introduced the predatory grooming trifecta, which is a program that I like to show how the predator will groom the institution first, then the parents, and then the child, which allows that predator to go undetected for years. And then that developed into the predatory internet grooming, which I call PIG, and the PIG Patrol, which helps schools and parents and students to understand this epidemic online that we're having. And it just helps give tools to help them figure that out. So I have helped with the New Jersey Coalition with their human trafficking program, and I am honored to be their 2024 Freedom Award winner. And I'm glad you all are here who are interested in finding out more from our viewpoint, because it is a little bit different. We live the experiences and we're happy to share it with you. So thank you. And I'm passing this on to who's next?
Cristian.
Cristian, okay.
Khalila.
Hola.
Oh,
Did you want me to go in your place, Cristian? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Khalila Riga. I am a author as well. I am a national speaker and the CEO and founder of Khalila Riga Consulting. I have been an advocate in this space since 2020. I have a wide range of experiences professionally, and my subject matter expertise is also in a wide range of things, from experiencing familial trafficking to labor and sex trafficking, and a host of other things. I'm grateful to the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking for inviting me to be on this panel, and I'm thankful that all of you are here to listen and learn and glean from our experiences, that you can take this back to your communities and really have some tangible actions on what you can do in light of sporting events and more. So thank you, and I will keep myself short. And Cristian, I'm passing it back to you.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm very, very happy that you are spending your morning with us because today is Human Trafficking Awareness Day, and that's why it's very, very important, this conversation. And I think that we are going to tackle a lot of myths, a lot of, when we hear about big events, we always see human trafficking on the news, but we're going to go beyond that. So my name is Cristian Eduardo. I'm originally from Mexico. I'm a survivor of sex and labor trafficking. I'm also an advocate for immigrants and LGBTQ plus rights. More than my lived experience, I'm also a person living with HIV. I'm an immigrant, so I have navigated a lot of systems. Kind of worry about some of the political climate that we are having, but I'm also one of the co-chairs of the New York State Anti-trafficking Coalition, one of the board members of the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and I also serve on different survivorship advisory boards across the country. I really focus on policy, legislation, and training, educating the community. I'm also the co-founder of Mujeres en Resistencia, a coalition of immigrants that we dedicate on educating about gender-based violence, including human trafficking and femicide, and we connect survivors and immigrants with free and accessible resources. So I'm very happy again that you are all with us, and I'm gonna pass it to Gina.
Good morning, everybody. So glad to be here with you all, and so honored and humbled to be here alongside some amazing survivor leaders whom I have a lot of respect for and consider my brothers and sisters. I am with the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking. I am their survivor consultant and the vice president to the board of trustees. I'm also co-chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Task Force Against Human Trafficking, and appointed on the Commission for the State of New Jersey, where I sit against human trafficking. I'm also a national speaker and advocate of human trafficking, as well as an author of As Survivor's Secrets and Anchors in the Storm. And basically, I'm also the founder of We Rise. It's an emergency assistance program for victims and survivors throughout the United States. Also the recipient of working with Theresa Flores and SOAP projects where we do a lot of collaboration. We believe in collaboration. It's not all about us. It's about inviting others to the table. Since none of us know everything, we rely on our own expertise. And everyone brings their own expertise to the table here. Mine is domestic violence, different forms of child abuse that led into sex trafficking. And I'm also the recipient of the National Liberators Award that I was honored and humbled to receive several years ago, and looking forward to the next one, Theresa.
I know.
So thank you, everyone. And you're going to hear so much today, and that's going to enlighten you from our own lived experience. So thank you very much. Back to you, Theresa.
Great. Yes, thank you. I'm glad that you brought that up, Gina. One of the things that you're going to hear a common thread is perhaps how we got groomed, or parental disbelief of the situation, or lack of support. We all have a very unique story. Each one of us here has a different story. So there's not just one survivor story or one way this happens. But you're also going to hear, the differences, but you're also going to hear this common theme through all of our stories that really connects us on what's happening. And I believe that those themes that are common have really not been dealt with yet in this country. Otherwise, we could be doing a much better job of ending this. So this webinar is on preventing human trafficking. And as Gina stated, I have been doing outreaches before the Super Bowls for 15 years now with the SOAP project. We're in the planning. We're planning right now. We're looking for volunteers for our next one, which is in New Orleans, February 1st. Excuse me. So there's lots of talk around human trafficking around this time of Super Bowl. Not necessarily because it's Human Trafficking Month, but because of Super Bowl. People love to take this time to talk about it. And, I don't mind that, because the traffickers are taking this time to really increase their profits, if you will. So there was an article after we did the New Jersey Super Bowl. I think that was 2014. And it came out, and there were some experts that stated human trafficking does not rise during big sporting events. That is a myth. And I will tell you that is not true. We have done research when Craig's list, or when Backpage was still up, and it didn't matter what kind of sporting event. It could have been a marathon. It could have been a NASCAR race. But ads on Backpage quadrupled before any kind of sporting event. And then they peaked, and then they slowly went back down, meaning then the traffickers moved their victims on to another spot. In New Orleans, we're very, very worried, because we've just had the Sugar Bowl, right? We have the Super Bowl, and then we also will have Mardi Gras following right after that. So it is a prime location for traffickers. And so in prevention of this, that's why we're already starting to talk about the World Cup, which is the big soccer championship, if you don't know, going to be in the summer of 2026. It will be in multiple cities across the country, and the finals will be there in New Jersey. So it is wonderful that the coalition is already talking about this. I've never seen any event have this much advanced planning, and I'm very impressed by that. So why? I'm going to ask some questions. We're going to just do this organically, and any of our amazing survivors can just pitch in and answer it as they'd like. The first question that we have is, why is it important to discuss human trafficking at the World Cup? Who'd like to take that? Don't all jump at once.
I'm happy to at least throw out a part of the reason. We have to be intentional about making note of human trafficking within the venue, so that people don't get lost. These venues, they open up places for people to meet, and things may seem really innocuous, but it's really a hotbed. And if we're not paying attention to that, and if we're paying attention to the incorrect media portrayal, as you just spoke on, Theresa, that there's not an influx, there's not an increase, and we're going to not look, and we're going to miss things that are truly in plain sight.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. We actually have some other experts on this call too that I noticed. We have Michael Bartel with Free International. A lot of organizations will do some sort of human trafficking work. It can be before, it can be during, or it can be after. So it is very interesting. It really does take a village, an army to fight this truly. So, John Michael, you were talking earlier, and if you don't feel comfortable answering this one, please pass it to somebody else. But what does grooming look like at events such as the World Cup? Like, who are the most impacted by this?
Well, I think there's the idyllic idea of who the people who are being targeted. But I just want to take one moment back and step back. Within my case, I wasn't your ideal person. I was a sports person. I was brought in on the inside. So if you think about if it's true that 1 out of 4 female and 1 out of 6 males are sexually abused before 18, look at the World Cup. Look at the Olympics we just had. How many athletes were there, and how many of those athletes have been abused and are still remaining silent? So there's a big dichotomy going on here. We've got the inside, which is happening within the sports world, and then you got the people that are being brought to the event who are being trafficked. So I think sometimes we need to open our mind a little bit more about that, because grooming happens differently and in different situations. In my case, the predator contacted my sporting team first and groomed them and got their protection around that, so that they knew that they could do what they wanted to do, but the organization was going to protect them, because the organization didn't want to lose their branding, didn't want to use their support of finances, didn't want to have their brand out there and muddied with this. So they would defend that, as we saw with the US gymnastics. And then that predator would go to the parents. But this is like in a constructed situation. What we're talking about here too today, which is what everybody thinks about with trafficking, is that are people who are vulnerable, who have like teenagers that have run away, or people who have been lured to do a job that's in the back pages that you were talking about, and they are not actual real jobs, but they're told that this is a possibility that they can get further ahead. Everything seems to come around a possibility, an opportunity, which helps these people think that they can move forward. So in my case, I come from an idea that this was going to improve my life and my family's life. So that's why I went through it. And in my case, we had to sign contracts. And the threat of breaking that contract is why I never spoke. And so that made it very difficult for people to get away. Grooming happens differently in different ways. There is not one list of things A, B, C, and D that you could check off to say this is a grooming process. I have seen a groomer change his process with each different target that he was going after within the same team. So it is just, it's hard to know. There are things that you should look for. I mean, let's think about it. Males are easily, I don't want to say easy, but males can be easy trafficked in these kind of situations going to the World Cup, because it looks like an older man and his son could be a father's son, uncle, brother, something like that. No one's going to question it. But if we're going to the World Cup and we're bringing a young girl with that, everyone now is starting to go, wait a minute, thanks to the SOAP project, who has all that information out there, people are able to go and think, oh, that could be something. But in my case, I can remember going to the Rose Bowl or to the Tony Awards and having someone say, I'm so glad your father's here with you. That's not my dad. So it just amazing. I don't know if that answers your question. That's a huge question to deal with in such a short time. Each predator does their own grooming in their own way. We can find little threads that connect, but there is no one set way to do it.
Right. Thank you for that, John Michael. Yeah. Anybody else want to comment about that one?
If I may, Theresa, just to kind of speak to what John Michael mentioned, the venue lends itself to people meeting each other discreetly, and what seems like, an off chance meeting is really constructed. So speaking to that grooming piece, grooming, in my opinion, and from my own personal experience, happens well before you ever get to the event, right? Because you don't want to have a fight with the person that you're trying to, the product you're trying to sell. So you're going to make sure that these platforms are in place, so to speak, so that you don't have an issue when you get there and no one's going to question who you're with. And very true, for my own personal experience as a young child, my first John that I was introduced to was at a soccer event. And I believe it was, and I am hazy on the timeline because, as we know, trauma does something to the brain in terms of timelines and how that looks. But it was either the Olympics or it was a World Cup, but it was in 84, 86 in that time frame, on the, between LA and Mexico. And I was introduced to this person as they were going to be a family member. And the next thing I knew, the people I had come with were gone. and I was with another individual, and it went from there. And everybody was like, oh, how sweet, you're here with your grandfather. Not my grandfather, have no idea who this man is, but nobody thinks of it. And so you have these things that look like chance, but they're really planned so well in advance by the trafficker before you ever get there. And then too, because of the chaos and everything going on, it may not be like a defining moment for some as trafficking, but it can be just the introduction, you know what I mean? And getting you comfortable.
So I think probably what's on a lot of people's mind is, we've heard it twice now, that the person that I was with was not who you assumed it was with. So we all know, because we all do public speaking on this, people are going to say, then why didn't you say something? Like, why didn't you tell somebody that, hey, this is not my grandpa, this is not my uncle? Can somebody speak to that? Because it really helps the audience, I think, to understand that that's not so easy.
I just want to say one thing real quick about that, because I think looking from the outside in and looking hindsight, that's an easy thing to say,
Yeah.
especially to someone who's a survivor. Why didn't you say something? A lot of times, as Khalila and I were saying, we're not even sure what's happening at the time. Here I am being brought to the Olympics in a private box that they had rented out, and I'm thinking that this is exciting. I'm not in the idea that this is wrong. I'm thinking this is an opportunity. And so to sit there and going through the turnstile and looking at the ticket person and say, this isn't my dad, what would you say? How would you say that?
Right.
And again, depending on how that grooming process was set up, in my case, if I did anything wrong, it was going to go back onto my family. They let them clearly know that. They've basically stipulated all the things that will happen if you don't follow through.
Right.
And if you're a young person, you don't know, and you're in a different city, you don't know where to go, what to do, who to speak to, who do you trust? And if your traffickers are policemen, judges, therapists, doctors, who do you go to?
Right. For me, my traffickers, my initial ones, they had this relationship with me where I thought they were my parents. I didn't know they weren't my parents. So I already had trust with them. So when they said, this is your family member, I don't have any reason to believe that it's anything different. So I'm not going to dispute that when someone says, well, why didn't you just say that that wasn't your grandfather? Well, I didn't learn that until much later in life. I had no idea. So again, it speaks to that whole grooming process that happens beforehand. There's such a relationship of trust based on fear, right? Or just trust if you're a child, because that's what they prey upon. You need to feel safe, you need to feel loved, you need to feel like we can trust you, because then it makes it easier to say, well, this is for your own good. Well, this is for this, right? And so that setup happens well in advance. So you don't have an inkling to really say anything until well after the fact.
Yeah.
Until after you realize what it is that's happened. And also during that whole grooming process,
30 years.
the whole grooming process, the sex part seems so minimal compared to everything else that's going around you. And it is normalized so much that you're like, oh, okay, that's what is expected of me. You're not even thinking about that. And I wish people could understand that a little bit more, because it's not so cut and dry. There are layers and layers. And by the time you get to the actual trafficking aspect, you've already been taught what to think and what to believe, how to react, how to respect these people. You are respecting them, and it's crazy. It's just crazy. Thank you. I didn't mean to jump back in, but
Fine. And I think it's, I always equate it to being in a cult, because it's a huge amount of brainwashing that goes into this. So
I'd like
John,
to share a little bit about that, Theresa.
Yeah.
I want people to understand too that human trafficking is not just about the World Cup. This is something that happens 365 days out of the year. And some people think that it's an international issue. They still think that. And that people will come into the United States for the World Cup purposely. And that's not really how it works. This is an epidemic. This is an issue where the World Cup is just one of many other events, only much bigger. It's like a New Year's Eve. And like you said earlier, Theresa, the traffickers are going to profit. It's a big business. And so this is something that happens every day of the year. And I think it's really important to know that, I mean, for me, I remember that most of my traffickers, they did two things. They moved around a lot, and they moved around a lot because they were following sports events and conventions. And they also moved around a lot because they didn't want to get caught. And that's huge for traffickers. Movement. For me, the trauma and the fear was something that held me back from not saying anything. When we say, well, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you go for help? I mean, I could remember reaching a point where I felt, I hope I get arrested, because I felt it was my only way out. In fact, I did, but that wasn't the answer, because I was treated as the criminal, which left me with criminal records and convictions that I just recently had 3 convictions, where recently it took my whole life, just a month ago, where I had my last conviction vacated. However, these traffickers, when we don't say anything, we're working out of psychological control, the fear, the shame, the threats, and the violence that these traffickers put upon me were real. They weren't something, they didn't have to beat me up. They didn't have to put a gun to my head, because I knew their threats were real. I experienced it. However, it becomes part of the grooming process, where it becomes a psychological control, where you are in alignment. And like you said, Theresa, like a cult, which it very well can be, as cults work. But it is really important, because that's why I didn't say anything. And when I was arrested, I wasn't believed. So being believed, and like Khalila said earlier, like feeling safe. I mean, if law enforcement at the time, and I know law enforcement has come such a long way in getting training and, you know, and doing so well. But at the time, my experience with law enforcement was not what I had thought it was going to be, even when I told them the truth, because you're so afraid. And I took that leap to tell the truth, and I was still treated like a criminal. So those who harmed me were let loose, and I was put behind bars and did time. So there's so many layers, like John Michael had said earlier, there's many layers to this. It's not a one size fits all, and everybody has a different experience and different perspective to this, but it does happen 365 days out of the year, and it comes in many, many forms, and it discriminates against no one. The World Cup is a highlight of what's to be and what's going to happen, but being a safe person is really important, so we could have that approachable effect on others. So we're not trying to fix others, but we're trying to create a safe place for them.
Right. Thank you, Gina. Yeah. Speaking, and I love how you said that this can happen to anybody, any age. I know of a woman that was 40 when she first got trafficked. And so there's that myth around that. Cristian, could you speak to the fact or the issue of, we always talk about minors, we always talk about sex trafficking, but in what other way in this area, this New York, New Jersey area, could the World Cup possibly be bringing in labor trafficking, adults? Like how could that look like?
Yes, I think that what everyone has been sharing, it's very important. But when we are having major events, I think that people always associate it with fun, with pleasure, with enjoyment, and a lot of times we hyper focus. And I think that it's okay for prevention of child sex trafficking, but a lot of times we forget that adults also can be trafficked, and that sex trafficking not only happen but also labor trafficking, especially around the immigrant population. And people will be like, but why? How this is happening? And events like the World Cup, I think that we have created this idea that because it's something very professional, because it's something like worldwide, it's kind of protected or it's kind of immune to abuse or violence. But this is not true. Like, we need to remember that, for example, for all these big events, most of the time we need to build infrastructure, we need to build new venues, and who is going to pay for this? Who is going to make, or who is going to construct and work on all this? We know that already labor trafficking is happening on construction, so it's going to be the same. Like, and the most impacted are immigrants. And also, I think that a lot of times we think that the only ones who can be coerced are kids, but that's not the reality. Like, adults can be coerced at any moment. And the World Cup has the perfect elements. I think that traffickers know what they are doing. One of the big things of the World Cup is that you're going to meet famous people. It can be an opportunity for you, for coaches to meet you. It's an opportunity for you for traveling internationally or travel to other states. It's an opportunity for you to meet new people, or there's a whole things that traffickers are gonna become to use coercive tactics that they are gonna be using on the people who are vulnerable. And when I say that they are vulnerable, it's people who have hope. It's people who are trying to get a better life, are people who looking for a job, are people who trying to support their family. So I think that that's why it's very, very important to understand how the World Cup has all these elements all together, even if it's done in purpose or not. Like, the reality is that for traffickers, it's like, oh, this is the perfect concoction for me to use. And one of the big things that we don't never, I think that a lot of times we never cross our mind, is that the World Cup is happening in 2026, and we knew it since last year. So we are giving traffickers 3 years of preparation to make sure that nobody noticed, to go through all this grooming process, to make sure that victims and survivors are not talking with law enforcement, are not talking with anyone, and they are making sure that those that are being exploited are convinced that it's their choices. So I think that this is very important. That's why it's so important to talk about the World Cup and big events, because we need to start doing something. Traffickers are already working on this because they know that this is a super big opportunity to really coerce and force victims. And we need to start doing the same. And we need to start counter that. And we need to start having all these hard conversations. And just to close this, the reality is that human trafficking increased with major events, not only sport events. I think that a lot of times people forget that there are conventions around video games, comics, and all these things. And one big also component that I think that we are in this kind of minimized narrative that human trafficking is not happening, it's because sports are a very male-dominant spaces, and we still think that boys and males cannot be trafficked, and that's not the reality. Boys and males are trafficked too.
So thank you for that. How can boys and males be trafficked during these events, and how does that happen?
I can start, and John Michael can follow. I think that John Michael really explained it very well. I think that especially for boys and males, this is the perfect opportunity. Like, do you want to be soccer playing on professional leagues? Do you want to travel? And we need to remember that a lot of times, and just for everyone to know, like, in each state there's a high numbers of prosecutions against coach, and it's not only soccer. It's soccer, swimming, volleyball. Like, you look at, I'm not kidding, you can look prosecution, coach, human trafficking, and you're going to, even if it hasn't been on the news, you're going to see a lot of prosecution in every single state. People will be surprised. And imagine if this is happening on a local level when there's no major events. Now, imagine what is going to happen now. There's something that I want to highlight. There was one case in Mexico where there was a coach. It was a soccer coach. So it was in a local community, and this coach just just imagine that he was part of FIFA. And the only thing that he did to coerce the parents and the kids and the local community, it was just put one sticker on the car. That was all that he needed. Everyone was like, "Oh, look, it's someone from FIFA. So it's great that our kids are being coached by this person." That was all. Like, and I think that sometimes we don't believe this, but it's because as parents, as an adults, a lot of times we project our needs and our wants into our kids. So a lot of kids were coached by this person, and after a couple of years, it was discovered that in reality, it was trafficking the kids. It was like taking the best soccer players, and it was not only exploiting them, but producing child sexual abuse material. Like, it was producing child pornography. So it was a huge case. Nobody could believe it. And when they were like literally asking the parents, like, so, but how nobody noticed, and it was like, well, this person has the logo of FIFA on the car. So like we thought that it was something professional, something that, so I think that this really highlight how it happened in local levels. And now that we have a big event, there's more elements that can be coercive, but this is real. World Cup is happening. Coaches are coming from other parts of the world. This is your great opportunity, like to finding and shining in this amazing world. So I think that that's huge elements. And especially with adults, I think that a lot of times what the tactic that can be used, it's like it's your last opportunity to become a professional player. So, and especially with youth and adults, and of course people, adults, males, feel hope, and that hope sadly is what traffickers use to coerce them.
Yeah.
Cristian, I agree. And I just want to jump in there real quick. And I think you said something really important. Traffickers are professionals. They are already planning this for the World Cup 2 years ago. Once they heard where the cities were going to be at, they started planning how to do this. They know how to do this. They know how to work the system, and they are counting on things like the World Cups, the Academy Awards. It's happening everywhere for everyone to focus on the event, not what's going on underneath.
Mhm. And a lot of people don't know this, but for these major events, it's a 3-night minimum stay in a hotel, no matter where you are around that event. So you say the Super Bowl, you're going to the Super Bowl, it's probably 4 or 5 hours long on a Sunday, but you have to check in on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, so what are you going to do to fill this time? And again, it's very male dominated. And there's always traffickers and planners there that are willing to share with you how you could spend your time. And it can be very tempting for people. So,
Theresa, I'm sorry to interrupt. Theresa, can you talk on the fact of how sometimes these hotels are in cahoots with the traffickers,
yeah,
which sets up what you were just saying? So I think that could clear that picture a little bit more. Like they
sure.
have to be there for 3 days. We have some events for you if you're interested, you
Right.
know?
We can advertise them in your hotel. So at the Soap Project, we get volunteers nationwide to help us label bars of soap and makeup remover wipes with the national hotline. They get trained, and we put together a missing children's poster of kids that are missing from that area. Because we know that within 24 hours, if they're not found, the trafficker has a very high probability of finding them. And so we have teams that will go and talk to hotels and motels. We leave nobody off of this list. So we will go to Caesars in Atlantic City, but we also will go to very low-end motels, and it's very interesting to see the different reactions from when our team goes in. It could be like, yay, you're here. We've heard about you. We're so excited. To like, oh, well, we don't have a problem with that, but go down to this other hotel, they do, So it's very easy to see those generally motels that are probably taking a take off of it as well, working with the trafficker, has been working with the trafficker for years, right? Has getting a cut from whatever they turn their eye to. So it is, and a lot of times the local police already know that, right? So it is something that, like you said, years of preparation go into this, not just for us, but for the trafficker as well. So, Katrina, and I'm going to ask you to answer this question, but if you don't know, that's completely fine. What kind of occupations or what kind of situations could happen around labor trafficking at these types of events?
Well, they can happen in very different ways. One thing to remember again, the before, during, and after, when you think of the before, whether it be construction needs that are required, also vendors that are selling items during the event,
Right.
whether it's even, again, speaking about hotels and, those who are cleaning the rooms, the additional staff that may be needed for this specific amount of time, there's just so many different ways, whether it's kitchen staff in restaurants, because, restaurant volume is now up because of this said event. I always tell everyone, just wherever your eyes can land, trafficking can happen.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter if you stop to get a pedicure at a nail salon, or you decide to go have dinner with friends, or you're buying a t-shirt off of a vendor on a corner. It happens everywhere. And for not a moment to ever think that, oh, well, they're safe, or oh, it can't happen over there. And also keep in mind, it's not, it's your neighbors. It's and the buyers are your neighbors, your relatives, your law enforcement. Everyone's responsible, accountable, and vulnerable.
Yep. I always say it's okay to be a nosy neighbor, like Aunt B. If
Yes.
your kid comes up missing, you would want that nosy neighbor next door to be like, hey, when was the last time you saw her? Right.
100%.
We kind of like put up walls and don't talk to each other and don't want to get involved. We don't, want to be wrong. But we on this panel wished somebody had been a nosy neighbor.
Absolutely.
Every one of us.
If I may, Theresa, just speaking to the labor trafficking piece and
Yeah,
how the influxes of things. So I had a period of time of about 7 years on and off where I was part of a traveling sales crew. Now, the sales crew itself, like my boss, she was not a trafficker. She was not part of, but there were, other people that I worked in tandem with that were in different positions of leadership or that were colleagues that were grooming, that were exploiting, that were trafficking. And so we would go from city to city, state to state, every week to 3 weeks. And when there was major events, right, speaking to that nosy neighbor thing, we're going door to door, right? And so you had people who were paying attention, who were like, wait a minute, you're not from this neighborhood. What are you doing here? Why are you here? But unfortunately, what we would see, what I saw happen in some cases was, sometimes law enforcement was called in, but the way that they handled it was just as, well, you don't have a permit, so you can't be here. And no one ever asked any other questions. Is anything else going on? Right. And it wasn't that something was wrong with the company. The company was legit. Everything was legitimate about it. They weren't, you know, uh, you could find all of their tax filings, you could find all of that, but there was other things happening under the surface of, if you don't have enough of this, you can't come in at night. We don't care that there's a blizzard. We don't care that there's that. So speaking to that element of that, human trafficking is happening 365 days a year, 24/7. There isn't a time period in which it's not occurring and where we don't have to be vigilant and where we shouldn't be that nosy neighbor Aunt B, right? Like I get teased a lot from friends or when I'm at houses, they're like, you are so like, why are you watching everybody? I'm like, because I lived it. I can't help it. If I know that you're not a typical car in this neighborhood, if I know you're not a typical person that I see on my day to day, I'm watching you and I'm watching where you're going. I'm paying attention to what you're wearing. And it's hard to not come from a lens of being hyper vigilant, but I feel like it's a good thing to be hyper vigilant. As I say in my trainings, the worst case scenario about being hyper vigilant is you get it wrong. The best case scenario, you're helping to create a trail of sorts of, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what's happening. And you can alert people around you. You can alert your law enforcement. You can alert neighbors. You can, and again, the worst case scenario, you got it wrong. The best case scenario, you're making a way for someone, you're creating a path towards recovery. You're creating a path for a victim to be able to choose to walk out of that. And I think that's something that we have to mention because I know people ask this a lot, well, what about rescuing? What about that? You're not rescuing anyone, right? Like, unless we're talking about children, right? Like under a certain age group, We're not rescuing anybody. We're creating a pathway. We're creating a space where victims feel empowered to be able to say, okay, I can do something different. This person feels like a safe person. And maybe if I show them just a little bit more, maybe they'll ask the right questions. Maybe they will have a resource, maybe something, right? And that's key is being that safe person, even in how you respond to what people say to you. And I think that's also something to mention in that aspect is we're going to know and we're going to recognize if you're a safe person. We'll give you a little bit, right? And it might be something that's not related to trafficking at all, but we're checking to see your response. Can you handle the weight of what we're telling you? What are your microaggressions? What are your, you know what I mean? All of these different responses that you're having, because you may not say anything with your words, right? Like I always say that, you know, while God delivered me of a lot of things, my facial expressions we're still walking out that sanctification process, and it's not all the way there yet. But you know, it's important to know that people are, we need to know that you're a safe place. We need to know, and it can be one person. In my experience, one person created that safe space. I didn't act on it, but it stuck with me for 20 plus years, that by the time I was ready, I remembered what they said. And I remembered that they said, you don't belong here.
And if I could jump on that.
Yeah.
If I could jump on that a little bit as well. I had a very similar situation where it was that one person. And I always tell people, we're just here to plant seeds. We're here to plant seeds, and we cannot always know when it will bloom. But we do the work. We plant the seed, whether it's just a kind face, a smile, you know, are you hungry? If it's something as simple as, for me, it was either go do time at Rikers or go talk to that person in the back of the courtroom, which was an incarceration alternative program. And, you know, I obviously chose door number 2, which was, you know, the young lady in the back room. But again, I still had to go to work that night. I still had to report back to my trafficker after court. And I had to be exactly where I was supposed to be as soon as that sun went down. And, you know, we just plant seeds. And then also I want to give a real-time example of just those vigilant, open eyes. I have a daughter that attends LSU. And as we know, Super Bowl is in a couple of weeks. And she called and she said, you know, there's been like some ads up for like brand ambassador opportunities. And, you know, she's excited to like, okay, I would love to participate, make some extra money. But she also know mom is mom. And so she's sending me these companies' names, and I'm running through these company names and looking at these ads and opportunities. And some of them were not real. They're not real. So even thinking about the Super Bowl right now, trafficking is happening right now. They're already have those that have already been recruited, those that are already ready to go. And then they're also looking for some people that are more local where they can take full advantage of that. And like you said, they move around a lot. From this event, they'll go to the next.
Yeah. And you're right about that, Katrina. There's that appeal of you can travel, you can do this, you can. And when you're 18 to 24, right? Like a friend of mine says, you know, your 20s are your stupid years because you make all of the dumbest decisions possible. Yeah. With no thought, no caution to the wind, right? But there's this appeal of, and especially in the culture that we live in now, right? The way our society is now. Oh, I could be a brand ambassador. Everything is promotion of self. Right. And how can I make my name known? My face could be everywhere. Right. And that appeals to young adults and to youth, right? Even to 30 somethings that appeal.
Absolutely.
So, you know, speaking to what Cristian said earlier about adults being just as easily trafficked as youth, the coercion tactic just changed a little bit, right? Even if we look at it from like across the lines of history, right? We can start with the transatlantic slave trade and that the shackles were around our wrists and our ankles. Well, guess what? Now they're through our computer screen, and here's how you can promote yourself. It's psychological, right? And
Absolutely.
it appeals to those very innate things that we all want. We all want to be seen. We all want to be heard. We all want to be recognized, maybe not always on a national or international platform, but we want to be seen, and traffickers will capitalize on that all day long.
Absolutely.
And again, I just want to jump in there. I think you guys are hitting such major points of myth busting here. The thing also is some of these companies are actually real. which is what Khalila had said. And so it's within that, and that's very difficult to find out. But the other thing is that's that word hope that Cristian said earlier that people have. And it's also, what is the difference between applying for an ambassador job and applying for a job at CBS? I'm just trying to think of something new. What's the difference? This is an opportunity that I can grow and follow my passion. But some people who are being trafficked are everyday people who just have dreams and goals, who want to move forward in their life.
Absolutely.
Our society puts such a stress on what success is and what it looks like that we are so programmed that we're ignoring the red flags that are popping up that Katrina was saying. Because, you have a mom who's going, wait, I'm looking this up. Don't go to that one. That's not a real one, and we laugh about it, but that's what we need, and
Yeah.
that's what we have to protect each other with. And I think that's one of the things that the SOAP project is great about, is leaving that bar in there. And I've talked to women who found the bar and said, oh my God. And then they put it in their pocket. They didn't do anything with it until they got it someplace safe that they could. But those are little seeds that we're talking about. But we've got to also realize that the word trafficking can be very confusing, because it sounds like we have to go across state boards, we have to go into another country. It can happen within the city.
Yep.
Gina,
My situation was completely centered in Columbus, Ohio.
right.
Did we get to go to trips with these predators? Yes, we did. But the trafficking happened right there.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
We've got some really great questions coming in on the chat, which we'll go over here about 11:15. Gina, this is such your specialty. I wanted to ask you, what do you think the role of survivor leaders or subject matter experts is going to be, especially pertaining to the World Cup, but in general of fighting human trafficking?
That's a good question. Well, I think what it is that we are doing already, that we are going to continue doing. I love what Katrina had shared earlier about planting seeds of kindness. And when we talk about prevention too, I know we all do this work 365 days out of the year, not just for the World Cup. And even if it's one person that walks away with having more awareness, because having awareness is going to be prevention. Our president, Danny Papa, often says it. He says, education is awareness and awareness is prevention. So if we as leaders can continue educating in any form, whether it be speaking engagement, projects, panels, our collaboration as we're doing today, and we continue to do this, not just for Trafficking Awareness Month, but every day of the year, that is going to bring us closer to helping others and to know that there are resources out there. I think there's just so many layers to this, Theresa. I mean, it's not like like I said, one size fits all answer. Again, going back to what Katrina said really resonated with me, because I often talk about this a lot, is planting seeds of kindness. I think when we look at other human beings through the lens of kindness rather than judgment, removing the stigma is so very important. I wish that I had the help and the support from a very young age that I did not find and understand until a very late age in my life. Because this is not just about trafficking. This is not just about organ trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking. This is about planting seeds of kindness. And for me, I didn't learn and know about seeds of kindness as a child. So many times, what makes us vulnerable? We just don't wake up, or we just don't dream as a child, as John Michael said earlier. We just don't dream and say, one day I want to be raped. I want to be under psychological control. I want to be beaten. I want to have my body sold as commodity to the highest bidder. This is not something I desired. This was not one of my dreams. My dream was to be loved, to be accepted, to be a part of, to have a purpose, to have a plan, to have dreams, to have aspirations, as everyone here so eloquently had shared. No one dreams of this violence. No one dreams that immigrants, that boys, that girls, that anyone of any age, of any background, of any color should be mistreated, should be treated less than. We are all equal, but the problem is we are all not treated equal. God made us all on equal ground to be loved, to experience fruits of the Spirit, kindness, encouragement, love, to lift each other up. And this is not the case. For me, the seeds of kindness were not planted where they should have been planted, where I learned about love. I did not learn about love. I learned about being rejected. I learned about just violence. I learned about fear. I learned about always trying to find a safe place. When you can't feel safe by the people who are supposed to love you, where are you going to feel safe? So when I was let out, when I reached a certain age and I thought I was going to spread my wings and fly, I didn't even realize my wings were broken. So I didn't even have a chance to fly. Other people recognized, like everyone on this panel had shared, other traffickers, they are brilliant. And I'm not comfortable even saying that and giving them that credit, but they are. They are planning this way ahead of time. They know who their targets are going to be. They have everything in a very big master plan. So when I left and thought I was going to spread my wings and fly and be a success and make people proud of me and make people love me and find my purpose and plan, what a disappointment, what a shock, what trauma, what devastation, because that's not what happened. But they found me. But when they started letting me in and coercing me and grooming me and making me feel loved, I never felt the love that I experienced by people who pretended to be my friend and forced me into this, I don't call it a life. They forced me into a hell that even after escaping, I had the life sentence. That not until, as I said earlier, not until a month ago did I fight my last third conviction. So it is a hell. So what we could do is continue to do. We're not all called to do this, but those who are called to do this in many various ways, we all bring our own different experiences to the table. That's why when we invite others to this panel, and it's not something we can do, and we know this, Theresa, right? Because Theresa, you often invite me to different things, and I invite you, and John Michael, we all do the same thing, because we all don't have the answers, but we can only speak of our own lived experience. And Katrina, back to what you said earlier, I cannot support that. So I can only support it to the max, because planting seeds of kindness and is so, so very important. How the help that I wish I had, I continue to get judged. When I went into hospitals, that, oh, she's suicidal. Like, I was already judged. Like, yeah, why am I suicidal? Or she was beaten. Why was she beaten? Because she's a loser. She's a problem. She's an alcoholic. She's addicted to drugs. She's a drug addict. Every stigma, every name, every label. And so no one got to the core. So did that make me feel safe? No, I wasn't believed. My nose never mattered, and I wasn't believed. And not being believed is just as harmful as what happened to me. It was re-traumatizing over and over. I still get non-belief today when people may read, whether it's a book, whether it's doing a presentation, but that's okay. I don't need to defend myself. I have my defender. I have my faith, and that's most important. And how I learned about love, how I learned about purpose and planting seeds of kindness was through all of you. You are not my family biologically, but you are, because you all have shown me what it means to truly, truly care and plant seeds of kindness. So when Katrina talks about seeds of kindness, she just doesn't spill those words out of her mouth. She amplifies, she walks, and I know you personally and as a colleague, Katrina, and I know you walk planting seeds of kindness along your life, as all of you do. So that's what's important.
Thank you for that insight, Gina. That's been really helpful. I'm gonna, this was not a planned question, but I think it's an important one because we're talking a lot about the traffickers are already there, right? We're talking about what do we do when the World Cup is going on, right? But is there any way that we can prevent this from happening? And I'm going to start with Cristian, and I would love to have each one of you answer that.
I think that the first thing, especially talking about the immigrant population, the LGBTQ plus community, people experiencing homelessness, people with substance use disorder, stop the victim blaming and stop like the stigma and the shame. Like we don't know what is the story behind. And even I will go beyond, and for people who are in prostitution, we need to start stopping this victim blaming. We talk about this. It's just that we a lot of times sugarcoating. When people say, why you didn't say anything, why you didn't tell that it wasn't your family member, why you didn't escape, that's called victim blaming. So we need to stop that. It's okay to be curious, but it's, to be honest, none of your business. What is the story behind? Unless you're a therapist or you're law enforcement, we need to stop the stigma. For everyone not living in big cities or like major cities, bring any of us to educate about human trafficking. It's not only about sex trafficking, but it's also about labor trafficking, and it can happen to anyone. I just want to take this opportunity because I think that a lot of times we think that only the immigrant population are undocumented individuals are very vulnerable to human trafficking, especially labor trafficking. You can also be trafficked as a citizen, and you can also be trafficked when you have a work permit and a working visa. So that's applied a lot because there are temporary work, job employment for or during the World Cup. So just keep an eye out of this, care about your community, and even if you haven't experienced it, talk about this. I think that this is the best way to prevent human trafficking, to have these huge conversations, have these hard conversations. Of course, people is gonna be like, no, this is not happening, that's a myth. Well, no, it is really happening. And the best way that we can prevent it is to build community and remove all the stigma from victims and survivors.
Thank you, Cristian. Anybody else want to chase that? Katrina?
Definitely jump in on that. You know, something that I always mention in my speaking engagements with the victim blaming, it's like, why don't they just leave? My response is, why don't you just stop smoking? Why don't you lose those 30 pounds that you struggled with for the past 5 years or so? Because again, we talk about the psychological shift that has to happen for a victim to know and feel that. I know for me, it was the fear of staying became greater than the fear of leaving. And when that shift happened, action happened. And I think that's the same shift that has to happen with that smoker that struggles with nicotine or, you know, other parts and you know, other habits, vices, or even just harmful situations in your life. And then also, we have to protect vulnerable populations, period. In our everyday lives, we always have to be thinking about protecting vulnerable populations because traffickers know what to look for. Again, grooming tactics are different with each and every victim. There's one trafficker that now assists law enforcement with different cases, and he always talks about how he would find victims, and this is pre-internet. So, but this same example can be used on the internet, because I monitor my daughter's social media, and you'll see someone that will come out of nowhere and say, "Hi, beautiful." And this is the same thing he used to do walking around malls. And he would see youth that maybe with just one or two friends, or maybe by themselves. And he would walk up and say, "Hi, you have beautiful eyes." And the person that looked him dead in the eye and said, "Thank you," and kept going, he knew that wasn't the one. It was the one that looked down when they received that compliment. He knew everything he needed to know about that person. And that same thing works online. It works in person. And we have to protect vulnerable populations. You know, one thing I've always taught my children is in school, be friends with that one person who doesn't seem to have a friend. They're sitting alone in that classroom or in the lunchroom. Go sit down and have lunch with them and get to know them. Something as simple as that can shift someone's life. So it's not just, you know, we also teach our children kindness. Again, seeds of kindness. We teach our children that it takes a collective effort from all of us. And the biggest thing that we can give, or the biggest takeaway I would love for you to take from this opportunity here today, is go tell 10 friends. Share what you've learned. Share what has inspired you today, because that conversation passes on to the next conversation, to the next conversation, and to the next conversation. And that's the only way we're going to knock this down. Is that awareness is key. We have to share this information, because you never know. Again, you don't know what your neighbor is dealing with. You don't know that whether or not your neighbor has a cousin that's been missing for the past few weeks, and, oh my God, I think this is what's going on. I've never had a speaking engagement where someone did not walk up to me at the end and tell me a story that they're either currently experiencing, or a family member's experiencing, or they've experienced in their past.
Absolutely.
And we have to share the message, and we have to protect vulnerable populations.
Thank you for that. That
Can
was
I jump in real quick on this?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think this is incredible information, and I just want to share really quickly. I think one of the major things as a victim or survivor, whichever word you want, however you want to identify, is you have to acknowledge it first to yourself. If you don't acknowledge it's happening to you, you will not see it happening. You will not believe it. You will stay there. You will stay because you've created all this false world around you of why you're there in the first place. And again, depending on how the situation works, and in my case, my mother was helping the traffickers put me in the places that I needed to be. They had gotten to her, groomed her to make sure that I was where I was going. So here is my mother. I can't go to her because she's part of the group. So where does one go? And then you've got to add on society's stigmas of what it is to be a male who's being trafficked. You must have wanted it. You must like it. Real men can't be raped. You must want to be a part of this. So we can't help you. But I do think that as people who are helping other people, really take a moment and follow your instinct, because I think your instinct inside will tell you something's just not right here. And then what we do is in that millisecond, we decide, oh, I'm just going to be a bystander and let it go by, or am I going to ask a question? You know, but it takes guts to do that, and it's scary. And if you know, like teachers see this all the time and they don't get involved because they don't want to take that responsibility. So they kind of just look the other way. And if teachers can see something, they can report anonymously. They don't have to give their name. But we need to start looking out for each other and taking accountability for what's happening. And the seeds of kindness are so important, and I love that. And the other thing is that we, as people who want to help out, have to be able to hear and listen. Because a young man is not going to come up to you and say, I'm being trafficked. He will do everything else he can. And he will size you up too. If you go in for a help, I know when I went into the hospital, I checked out the nurse first and said, this is not someone I'm talking to. They're not going to believe me. They're going to blame me. I shut down. And we have to be able to hear.
Yeah, I think that's really important what you both have said. And like in the trainings that I do, you know, there's a couple of key points that I always bring up, and that is if you live in a zip code, and even if you don't live in a zip code, you have to come to the acknowledgement that trafficking is happening. I don't care what zip code you're in. I don't care how rural you are. If your nearest neighbor is 10 miles away, don't take that as, well, trafficking can't be happening here, because it most certainly can and most likely is, right? You don't have to leave your home to be trafficked. I've worked with many a client who never left home, and yet they were trafficked, right? You know, and the other thing too is, you don't have to have had the experience of some sort of interpersonal violence or trafficking or fill in the blank to have a heart for it, right? The way that one of the ways to prevention is taking that extra 30 seconds, that extra minute, to really be relational, to really stop and actually listen, and not just listen with your ears. You have to listen with your eyes. You have to be able to take a moment to see what's actually happening. How many people go to a coffee shop on a regular basis, and you tend to go to the same one, or your grocery store, or, you know, fill in the blank. At every system that we interact with, whether it's medical, school, law enforcement, community that you live in, your neighborhood, you're going to see the same people. If we're, you know, my husband, he likes to call our cell phones idiot boxes, which I love, because most of us spend most of our day doing this, right? Because we might have missed something in the last 5 seconds on Facebook that we didn't see 10 seconds ago. But when we're doing that, we're not paying attention to the person that's in front of us, right? I can go into my local coffee shop, and within seconds, I know if one of my baristas is having an off day because something has shifted in their countenance. Something has shifted in the way that they normally interact. And if I take the extra 30 seconds out of my day, the extra 5 minutes to say, hey, is everything okay? How are you feeling? I notice you're not, you know what I mean? Those little things create the space for people, for victims, potential victims, survivors, to feel like this is someone who actually cares, right? Like, if I'm asking you how you're doing, please don't give me the fine version. I want the 10-minute rap sheet that tells me how you're actually doing. Because if we're not being personal, if we're not being relational, if we're not taking that time, and that's how we plant those seeds of kindness, right? We're relational. We actually care, not just a surface, I'm pretending to care so that I can move on about my day. No, we have to take the time to be intentional about that. That's how we start to create those pathways to prevention.
It's kind of like, that's why we got trafficked, was because that wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
We have some really great questions that I do want to get to, since we're going to move on here. And I'm hoping Kat, Serena, you can speak on this, but if anybody else can. Somebody wants to know, our court prosecutors, our courts, our judges, are people like that being trained on human trafficking? Like, is there any kind of legislation? And I know you're in New York. 3 of us here are from Ohio. So what is it looking like as far as training for the legal, that's like the next step, right?
Well, it varies state to state, city to city, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I know that most jurisdictions have some introductory training when they're coming into that specific department that is around trafficking. I know that in New York City, there are courts that are specific to trafficking. So if you are arrested for, said crime, and you're identified as a possible trafficking victim, you may land in that specific court. That is what happened with me.
Courts are those?
Say it again.
What kind of courts are those?
It's, for me, it was juvenile. They have it in adult courts. They also have it in juvenile courts. And when working in Atlanta, we had advocates, and at that time I was an advocate that worked directly with victims. And if I say a young lady was arrested for shoplifting, and if they're brought into the juvenile system, there are counselors who do intake interviews. And based upon the responses of those interviews, they determined whether they were high risk or possibly a trafficking victim. And if they were either of those categories, an advocate will come in to the juvenile system or into the juvenile corrections center, and we would start engaging with that person. And if we also saw those same flags, we will then negotiate with the prosecutors with, hey, this isn't a criminal. Let's dig a little deeper. Let's have some deeper conversations. You know, yes, this is shoplifting, but let's dig a little deeper as to why. And in those cases, oftentimes they would implement some level of probation, which look like the advocate will visit with the person once or twice a week. I would also show up at the schools. I got to know the full sphere of everyone that's in their lives. And if they stuck with those programs or any additional programs that may be in place, because oftentimes we will put in parent coordinators as well. So we built a wraparound team around those families so that whatever those vulnerabilities were, we did our best to meet those needs. Again, it varies from city to city, jurisdiction to jurisdictions. Some people have robust systems in place, and the reality is most of them do not. That's the reality. Most of them do not. Even in training law enforcement, I would often get the response of, I want to help, but it's very hard for us to commit to the help when I pull this young lady off the streets, get her back to her family, and I see her back out there 2 weeks later. And it's easier for me to turn my head than spend the next 2 hours filling out a paperwork stack, because minors require a lot more paperwork than adults, a stack of papers, when I just want to go home. And again, this is heart to heart work. This is we have to get back to our hearts. We've got to get back again to those seeds of kindness. And if we have to take that extra step, we take the extra step. Same thing with social workers in school. Yes, this young lady's been running away from school. You know, we see her here and there for the last 6 months. You know, just take the extra step. Take the extra step. So, you know, it varies from city to city. I've seen places where they've done it well. I've seen places where there needs to be a complete overhaul.
I have to toot our horn. In Columbus, we have the Catch Court, which is one of the oldest, stands for Changing Action to Change Behavior.
Nice.
We'll refer to it as the prostitution court.
Yes.
But they are providing housing, addiction recovery. So yeah, it has to be a wraparound situation. Gina, can you answer one of the questions on here? What's the status of some of the New Jersey legislation going on?
Well, it's a work in progress. We have really robust legislation going on, but it's also challenging, to be quite honest. I mean, it has to go through different phases, and sometimes we hit brick walls where, you know, we get unanimous votes, and then sometimes we go to the next step, and then we don't have the support that we would like to have. We have a really strong, robust legislation committee with the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking. We have, I can't emphasize enough, our legislative committee that we have that works tirelessly with legislation, as well as PAC too, out of New York, Alex Delgado, who does a lot of work with legislation, and many people, to name a few. But we're constantly working on legislation, and it's just an ongoing process, Theresa. And it's different legislation. Right now, we've been working on the World Cup to have a survivor centered, led with all survivors throughout the United States, lead this project. And it was passed, but then now we hit another bump in the road. So it's all a process that, you know, takes time, commitment, and hard work. Dotting the I's, crossing the T's. Most importantly, and I think this applies to any state, you know, one of the things is that working with the AG's office is very important. And if you don't have that collaboration with the AG's office, which sometimes you can, I hear it's less than more. I believe your state, Theresa, has a really robust AG's office that works directly with survivors, not just one survivor, but many, many survivors. There's also one other state, and I'm not sure, it may be Tennessee, but if anyone knows, please correct me or jump in. But there is another state of an AG's office that works with legislation and survivors, and they also send them on retreats once a year. And I'm not sure of which state. I think it's Tennessee, but I also know Ohio ranks high with working with the AG's office. We are, to be quite honest and transparent here, we are quite challenged by that. Many people, unfortunately, feel or believe that they can do this work without survivors. And sometimes they will use survivors like, it's Human Trafficking Awareness Month, let's bring in the survivors. But then the rest of the year, you know, I'm not saying we're tokens, but the rest of the year, they don't care if we're part of the call or not, or part of the project. And what's important is, it is true, nothing about us without us. And one survivor is not enough. We need many survivors, because many survivors all have different lived experiences, since this comes in so many different forms. And so one of my hopes and dreams is that all AG's offices, not just New Jersey, will collaborate with survivors and know that it's important. So if you're doing a project, whatever organization you're representing, if you're on a phone call, no matter what it is you're doing, if you don't have a survivor that's part of that call, that's part of that project, that's sitting at the table, and then you're not doing it right. And excuse me, if you have a survivor that's at the table, but their voices are being drowned, and you really just have them there to have them there, but they're not part of the process, and then you're still not doing it right. That's not being survivor informed. So it's very important, as much as we need all of you professionals that come with different backgrounds and different expertise. We can't do it without you, and you can't do it without us. So we need to collaborate and work much better than what we're doing. And it really hurts my heart when I hear survivors being used as tokens, and they're just feeling, it's like they're giving them a seat, but they're really not being heard. And that is really harmful. So please, we don't want to do that.
Be on board. They should be involved every step of the way. Definitely every step of the way, because we're all, like you said, a little different on different scenarios. If any of you don't have a survivor on your board, or that you're working with or employed, you can reach out to us. We have somebody from New Jersey on here, 2 from New York City, 3 of us from Ohio, but we know a lot of other survivors who we could recommend that are in a good enough space, healing wise, to do that. So does take somebody that is quite healed. We don't want to add more trauma to them. So we have 2 more questions, and then we're going to end it with, does anybody know about that hand sign? I've seen a few things about it. Somebody asked me if that hand sign is still a thing or works. Does anybody know?
In my personal experience of clients that I've worked with, I have not actually seen that anybody utilizes that. Personally, just in my neck of the woods, I haven't seen that anybody utilizes that. I've seen it circulate on social media, but to my knowledge and my experience, it's been more of something that I don't know who started it, I don't know who developed it, and I don't know that people are actively using it. And quite frankly, even if it was something that could work, who's actually paying attention and not focused on their phones?
Exactly.
Right. So it has potential to work, but it can't work if people aren't being vigilant. So, but I have not seen that anybody's actually utilized it and that it's worked personally.
And if not everyone knows about it, it's not going to work.
Yes, they are talking about this sign. Like, it's more used in domestic violence.
Yeah.
And also, like, even in domestic violence, not everyone knows about it. So it's not specific for human trafficking.
Yeah, and the same with there's a thing called an angel shot, and I've seen little cards at bars before, and it's like, if you're afraid to walk out to your car, ask for this shot. If you need police right away, ask for this shot. But I think every bartender in the country would have to know that. So yeah. Okay, the next one is a hard one, but I think it can be filled with hope to end this out. We'll go down the line, each and every one of you, if you feel comfortable. I think it would add a lot to these questions that I'm seeing on here. One of them was, how would you have liked to have been helped? Or like, what scenario, what do you wish somebody would have done for you? I think that's such an amazing, good, solid question. So if anybody wants to start.
I wish that I was believed. I wish that I was respected. I wish that I was accepted and loved and not judged. And I wish that I was, I feel that if I had all of that, and then it would have left me much more not open and susceptible to being a victim and a target of human trafficking, plus struggling with some unseen disabilities I struggle with, made it even worse. So that's how I feel I could have gotten help.
Thanks, Gina. Who else?
I think I'll jump in here real quick. I wanted to be heard. I think towards the end of the 4 years of my high school career, after I had been going through this for so long, I realized that my mother wasn't going to help. I didn't know who to go to. So I did go to school and drop indicators to try to get a teacher to ask me what was going on. Because of who I was and what I was representing, because I won the World Games when I was 16, they thought it was just me going through this pressure of representing the United States. They didn't take time to find out what it really was. So they just assumed by what I look like and how I was handling everything that I must be okay. It's just a pressure point for him today. So we're going to ignore that. But to be heard and to be believed are the two big things for me. And to just have someone ask me, which is what you all have been saying, are you okay? What's going on? And take that moment to let me share my story.
I
Thank
think
you.
I agree. Oh, sorry, Katrina. Go
Oh,
ahead.
no. Well, I think the heard and believe is a very common thread. And for me, I wish I was heard and believed before I came in contact with my trafficker. Because the very things that my trafficker saw, the vulnerabilities that my trafficker saw, were quite evident before making contact with my trafficker. Whether it had been a school counselor, whether it had been one of my parents, there were things that were going on with me that were quite evident. And if that had been focused on or attention brought to that, I might not have ever made contact with that trafficker.
Yeah, I think I agree with the same sentiments that have been said, of being heard, of being believed, but also I think, speaking to Gina, I believe it was you that brought it up of, the behaviors that were being displayed, right? Don't look at me as just a runaway. Don't look at me as, well, she just shoplifted. Don't look, we're looking at all of these responses to the traumas that we're experiencing, and no one is digging beneath that to understand the root and the core of why is this happening? Why, as a child under the age of 10, are we not looking at a child who's running away from home 3 to 5 times a week and saying there might be something going on here, right? The signs were always there, but if we're unwilling to look and listen with more than just our ears, and if we're unwilling to see what's actually happening and dig a little bit further, even if we're wrong, we're going to miss so much. And so I think those are the things, and I can say that transcending through my entire experience of 3 to 32, had someone just taken 30 more seconds to listen and to believe and to dig just a little bit, it would have made a world of difference.
Cristian?
Just want to jump in there real quick because I think you hit something really important. We sometimes just look for the negative things that people have done. There's also a change of habits if someone becomes an overachiever. someone who has to be perfect. Those are things that are different from who they are from the very beginning. Those are signs of screaming something's wrong.
Cristian?
I would say that, especially because I was trafficked as an adult, I would say that believe that adults can also struggle, and that human trafficking intersects with mental health, domestic violence, intimate violence partner, and other form of abuse and violence. So if anyone that you know it's acting out or is acting different, check on them. Check on them as human beyond labels.
I wish.
And
Oh, go ahead, Kev.
sorry, Theresa. Oh, well, also consider life after the trauma and life after that experience. Once we have that has ended, it doesn't end. It doesn't end. We carry this every day. And years later, for me, like 20 years later, it's still there. And understand there's a life after this life, after that life.
Yeah, just because it's over doesn't mean it's over. Like,
Absolutely.
our healing begins. So yeah. For me, I wish that my neighbor had said something to my parents. It's just as simple as that. He saw me running through his backyard several nights a week at midnight with my pajamas on and barefoot. Like, what did he think that I was doing, or where was I going? So if he would have just simply said, "Hey, I've seen your kid running through here. You might want to check it out." That could have saved me tremendously. Something simple as that. So, well, thank you guys so much for this. Gina has an announcement to make, and I just really appreciate all of you wonderful survivor leaders for coming on, for being vulnerable, but sharing your expertise with everyone, because that's how we stop this. Gina?
Yes, everyone, thank you so much. Thank you for being here and for supporting us and all the work that we do. I'd like to announce that on April 1st and 2nd, we are having a 2-day law enforcement conference sponsored by the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking. But it's not just for law enforcement, it's going to be for all professionals, and there's going to be so much important information that we're talking about today, but we're going to be expanding upon from many different survivor leader experts that are going to be coming in from across the United States. And many of us will be there. Many of us will be guest speakers. We will be having panels. We will be having if you go to our website, www.safernj.org, you will find the information, and I encourage you to register. So thank you so much. And thank you, Theresa, for moderating. Thank you for the coalition for sponsoring this event today. And wishing everyone a wonderful day, safe and happy weekend.
Bye-bye. Thank you.